Welcome to Madlit Musings, the podcast where we dive into the minds of authors, exploring the profound realms of faith, social issues, and the delightful world of entertainment. I'm your host, Jaime Jo Wright, and on this literary journey, you never quite know what you're going to get. Hey everyone, it is Jaime Jo Wright here at Madlit Musings. And, it's always fun to see who's going to join the show. And today we have with me Rene Gutteridge, and I'm really excited. So hi, Renee, and welcome.
Hey, thanks for having me. I'm super excited.
I'm excited to have you here too. You and I have never met in person, but
No.
we've already discovered we like the mutual idea of sitting at a coffee shop and just chatting. So I think we're going to be great friends.
We're obviously.
Obviously, we're already kindred spirits.
Yes.
Oh, fun. So you have had quite a storied career, pun intended. But you've written a lot of fiction, and you're also a screenwriter. So rather than me just going on and on about who you are, can you give us a little bit of your background, just so people listening know who you are?
Sure. Yeah. Well, I was always a reader, and then discovered writing when I was little and just started writing stories, I think like a lot of writers. And then went to college, thought I would go into broadcasting, and I then ended up hating that. So then I thought I'd go into the FBI.
Oh, okay, because that's a natural segue.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's a natural segue.
I was like, I want to carry a gun. I'm doing this. And then I had a professor come to me in the middle of that, about to switch. And he was like, have you ever thought about being a writer? And I had taken screenwriting classes from him for fun, And I guess nobody in my life really said you could do this for a living, It was kind of always considered my hobby.
Yeah.
So that's kind of how it started. Graduated from college, stayed in Oklahoma. There was not a film scene at the time. So I ended up graduating mass comm with an emphasis in screenwriting, but we stayed in Oklahoma. So that's when I turned my attention to novels.
Okay.
And, I did the whole writers conference thing. I went to writers conference. I didn't even know what a writers conference was. Never heard of it till I got like this little, I don't know, postcard in the mail. I think it was, I can't remember now which conference it was, but I just dove into all of that, started going to conferences, loved it, was with my people, and started learning and really studying it. I knew there was a learning curve to this, especially from screenwriting over to fiction writing. And then I got published fairly young, when I was 26 years old. My first book was Ghostwriter with Bethany House, and spent 20 years doing that.
Yeah.
I've published, I think, 26 books at this point.
Awesome.
Most of those novels. And then, but I never lost my love for film and screenwriting.
Okay.
I didn't really think it was a possibility because of Oklahoma, being in Oklahoma, but the film scene started sort of exploding here in Oklahoma. And around that time, I got a strange string of offers to write novelizations of motion pictures.
Okay.
So I did like 5 of these, and that opened as a door for me back into filmmaking. And from there, I ended up making an independent film with a friend of mine based on my book Skid, and it won Dead Center Film Festival's Best Oklahoma Feature.
Awesome.
Which is our big film festival here.
Yeah.
And then from there, at that film festival, I met, I was standing in a corner watching people as usual, as writers do.
As writers do. I was going to say, that's corners we're very familiar with.
Absolutely. Yes. That's our spot. And my producer dragged me. She's like, "What are you doing?" I was like, "I'm in my place." And she's like, "You've got to meet people." So she literally dragged me over and threw me in front of this man and said, "You two talk. You should get to know each other." I told a stranger, right? So I start talking to this guy, and he ends up being the director for Skit Guys Studios, which I knew of the Skit Guys. Had no idea they were based in Oklahoma. So we started talking, and then he kind of said, "Hey, we've been looking for a writer. Could we, have coffee and talk?" And that led to, at 40 years old, making a huge career shift into filmmaking, which at 40, it seemed giant. It just seemed like the biggest. It was so risky for me.
Right.
But I've been working for them. I'll start my 10th year in January working for them. And so that's how I continue to do screenwriting. Within there, I also had one of my books made into a Hallmark movie. And then Skit Guy Studios did the feature film Family Camp, which was a huge success. It kind of did better than we thought.
Awesome.
We had our expectations, and it just went beyond that. Spent 9 weeks in the theaters, I believe. So anyway, that's where we land, working on our next movie. And movies take a long time to make, average of 7 years per movie. So but
it's so fascinating to talk movies when we think of books as readers and even as writers, because I'm like, oh, it takes a year to write a book on average, and then another year to get it published. So you're kind of looking at a 2-year length of time from start to finish. And then you start talking to people in the movie industry, and you just sort of assume it's like, oh, we're going to make a movie. Here's the cast. Let's go. And it's like, oh, no, this is a decade-long process.
It's very long. And ours hit in the middle of COVID. So that was a whole other event that we had to work around. But, God was good and worked it all out. And it was a really great experience.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Okay, so I've always wondered this, because I'm not a screenwriter. I just write fiction. What is the biggest difference between writing a fiction novel versus writing a screenplay? Because I know that I've talked to some people who are like readers like me too, who are like, don't you just take the novel and then make a movie out of it?
Yes, no.
You're like, let's talk about that.
Yeah, it's and I apologize to your listeners who are having to hear my ragweed allergy come to light here, but so novels have something that screenplays don't, which is point of view and inner monologue. And because of that, a really well-written novel cannot be adapted page by page, because screenplays are everything you can hear, everything you can see, written in the shortest way possible. So it does take, a friend of mine, Andrea Nasfell, told me once, she adapted my book Boo into a screenplay. And she told me once, I said, well, how do you do it? Like, what's the trick, to adapting well? And she said, you read the book 5 times, shut it, and never open it again. I was like, I don't think you should tell people that. I think novelists would like to know that you have it opened, you're highlighting, things.
Right, you're annotating.
You don't want to miss anything from that book. And she goes, yeah, but it's so different that you cannot rely on how it's told in the novel to make it look great on the screen. And as I've gone through more of my career, that's absolutely true. In fact, it's extremely hard to teach a novelist how to write a screenplay. We have like 10 tools we love, and screenwriters have like 3. So I'm taking lots of tools from you. And so anyway, but when I teach screenwriters, to write novels, they're thrilled. They're like, oh, I get this and I get this, and there's no budget, and there's, all the time in the world. And so,
Right.
yeah.
Yeah, I suppose with screenwriting too, as you're building scenes, you even have to think of like you just said, the budget, because you can't all of a sudden transport somebody into the scene where there's a huge investment in even the set and the costuming and all of that, I would imagine.
No, absolutely.
Okay.
The budget sits right in front of your face.
Jeez.
It is the number one thing you're really
Yeah.
having to think about,
Yeah.
because and especially now, post COVID, post strike,
Mm-hmm.
we're all having to think of things that we call containment films, which have limited location, limited characters. So we're doing a lot of taking feature films, that were, $10 million at one point, and trying to figure out how to do it for 2 million.
Yeah.
And so, location is a big deal. Number of people who have speaking roles is a big deal. So yeah, it's a lot of stuff that novelists do not have to think about.
No.
And if you are a novelist out there, you'd be thankful for that, because
Okay, I am.
because it feels like sometimes a very constrained way of writing.
Yeah.
There's a lot of rules. You have to hit this by page 13 and this by page 25 and this, and so there's a lot more of the discipline of it, and not only that, but you have to learn the format of it. So
right.
But it's fun. It also you can write one, in 8 weeks, 6 weeks, 12 weeks. I mean, it goes a lot faster as well.
Sure. Oh, that's so cool. It's so interesting to hear about, because I don't know. I think as somebody who I watch movies all the time, like people are like, what's your hobby? I'm like, well, if it's not reading, I'm watching TV or movies, because it's a story, right?
Yes.
But it's so different, and everything is communicated to you in a visual form too, and then vocal inflections and things like that. And, all the things that I noticed. I was talking to some writers once, and I said, go pick a scene in a sitcom, a movie, whatever, and just look at how the color is used in the scene to portray the psychological emotion of this. You're not, there's color, and everything's coordinated in a certain way, and people aren't just randomly putting clothes on from a closet. They're specifically picked. And, it's fun because you can learn so much as a writer by watching.
Absolutely. I mean, there's, we can learn from both of these, from each other. But there are also things that we have to be careful of. I teach a class that's always well received, called How Film is Ruining Your Fiction. And the point of that class is novelists are starting to write scenes and not passages. So we're starting to write scenes like movies. We're forgetting, a lot of, like, I call it directing your character. So you're telling your character to go to the cabinet, and you're telling your character to walk across the kitchen, and, forgetting the whys, forgetting why the character cares about that coffee mug. That's more interesting than the fact that he's getting a coffee mug.
Right.
But I understand it because we're starting to see scenes in our heads, because all of us are movie watchers.
Yeah.
So it infiltrates sometimes in a negative way. But if you're aware of it, there are many things you can pull from screenwriting as well, like very tight dialogue.
Yeah. I do want to get to talking about the movie Family Camp, but before we go there, I was as you were chatting, I was thinking about, I was reading a couple books this last year, and I was having a difficult time because right as I would get into the scene, then the scene would change. And I kept going back and forth. And I went to my husband and I said, I can't figure out, they're interesting books, but I keep feeling like it's just going really fast. He goes, it's probably the new fiction. And I'm like, what do you mean the new fiction? And he goes, you know how we have 30-second reels? He goes, now we have 30-second scenes in books because our attention spans And, he's into psychology and everything. So he's like, our attention spans have become so much shorter that you'll probably see in fiction as younger writers come up, that scenes get shorter and more quippy and to the point, and then they move on. And I'm like, oh, that's terrifying.
Well, and it, in my opinion, I guess being of the older generation, but it also is most likely a book you won't remember because it might be entertaining in the moment.
Sure.
But if you don't have an attachment to a character through their inner monologue, their point of view, how they see the world, you're like, oh, that was really interesting. And you never think about it again.
Yeah.
But the books that spend the time using point of view and inner monologue are the ones that kind of stick with us, kind of haunt us for a few weeks. The ones that we often tell, hey, you have to read this book, right? So I think there's a difference. I think it's worth, I think you can still write a well-paced book using, the tools of a novelist, but it has to be interesting.
Yeah.
We often, as novelists, we're so engaged. We have 15 plates spinning. And sometimes the ones that we forget is interesting and entertaining.
Right.
Because we can really get bogged down into the story, So.
And then you can get the messages from your editor like I got was, Charles Dickens is dead. Let's let him stay in the grave. We don't need 5 pages to describe the room that your character just walked into.
Exactly. I know. Yeah. And that was the first mistake I made in my novel. I remember the editor notes on the first novel I published. He was like, we gotta dial back the setting,
Yeah. It's funny. It's all a story of balance, right? And whether it's a screenplay or a novel, etc., or all of that. But okay, so we're gonna jump a little bit because my brain does that. It jumps and then I never go back. So I apologize.
But thank you for the warning.
For mental whiplash that you're gonna have here in this podcast. But I was thinking as we were talking, because it's a natural thing to think about, I was thinking about my church and what they put up on the screen on Sunday morning. But a lot of times we see Skit Guys in our church.
Yeah.
And I don't know if everybody listening is familiar with the Skit Guys, but I find them to be really funny. And
they're awesome.
The movie Family Camp was cracking me up because I've been to family camp. I grew up going to camp. I worked at camp. I was a camp counselor. And people think those things are exaggerated, and some of them are not.
They're not. Yeah. I think we've all had some kind of camp experience that we can identify with.
Yes. I remember one that sticks out, and looking back on it now, I'm like, oh my gosh. But my friend and I, there was a prison not too far from the camp that we worked from, and somebody escaped the prison. And so they had told everybody who was on staff that especially the girls, because he had a background with women, you're supposed to be in pairs at all times because everything's stretched out through the woods, It's not like
that sounds
congregated
terrifying.
in one spot. So my friend and I decide we forget, because that's who we are. We forget that there's this random criminal running through the woods hunting women. And we decide, let's go build a campfire in the woods and just have a deep moment of spiritual worship and connection with the Lord. And no joke, we're sitting around this little tiny campfire that was pathetic because we didn't know how to build one. And we're literally singing worship songs like, shine, Jesus, shine, and all of a sudden my friend looks at me, she goes, oh my gosh. And I'm like, what? She goes, I forgot. The felons escaped. And then we freaked ourselves out. Every stick that cracked, we are throwing dirt on the fire, and we linked arms, and we were running down the trail in the woods going, shine, Jesus, shine, trying to get back to civilization so we weren't murdered. And we get back, and I'm just like, that is such a classic camp moment. Like,
it is the campfire story to be told through the generations.
I know. I'm like, and some of those old worship songs we were singing loud because we're like, man, if we're going to die at the hands of this felon in the distant north woods of Wisconsin, we are going to go down worshiping the Lord.
That is so funny. I'm going to have to share that with the guys because they will love that story. That might spark an entirely new family camp movie. Who knows what's going to happen with that?
Oh, funny.
That's
So,
a really great story.
oh, it's one that I love to tell my kids, and my husband has been a youth pastor, so when we are always around the campfire, I tell them about the felon and the worship music, and keeping your wits about you when you know that you're going to be murdered. You go down singing praise songs. That's
Well,
always
and
my
it's
thing.
so precious, your age and how innocent you were out there trying to be with Jesus. And
We were like 15 or 16, I
oh
think it
yeah,
was. It was just
yeah.
like we were just lost in the woods, thinking, "Oh, this is just beautiful." I did get close to the Lord. I did.
Oh, I bet.
Both in spirit and potentially in body too. I'm not sure.
Oh,
I always kind of like in the past now I look back and I'm like, I wonder if the felon was in the woods watching us going, those are two I am staying far away from. They are more terrifying than I am.
right?
Those are not girls I want to chase down.
Maybe he turned his life over to the
Maybe,
Lord.
I know,
You'd have
maybe
no idea what
we'll
was
find out
happening.
when we get in heaven that all of a sudden this guy comes up. You remember that time you were running through the woods to save your life from me and singing worship songs? I met Jesus that day.
Gosh. Oh, that's a great story.
Oh man. But okay, so for those who don't know, Family Camp and the Skit Guys are all about humor
Yes.
and bringing irony and stuff. So one of the things I wanted to ask you as the screenwriter, do the Skit Guys, I think they're Tommy and Eddie, is that their first names? Do they actually bring their humor into the screenplay, or is it your humor in the screenplay that they then interpret and put on the screen? Or am I totally off?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think it's both. You know, we work very much in a writer's room sort of way at Skit Guys for all the videos that we put out to churches, and the screenplay. You know, I oftentimes lay down the first draft, not always. Brian, our director, put down the first draft of Family Camp. By the time it got to screen, it was very different because we had done a lot of work on it.
Yeah.
And so, you know, there's all kinds of meetings, read-throughs, notes, lots of notes that have to be applied. You know, scenes that have to be adjusted due to budget. You know, a lot of things go into it. But at the end of the day, you know, as their screenwriter, my job is to match their humor. I'm writing their product, right?
Yeah.
And over the years, my humor has very much adapted to them. So, you know, in some of my other projects, I don't necessarily do that, but anything I'm writing for the Skit Guys, we write on brand, right? There are certain things that are very important to us, and that we want in all of our scripts. So, you know, it's my job to make sure that that's all in there, that it feels good to them, and, you know, they'll speak up about it too. So it's really fun. You know, I went from a very solitary job writing novels to a very collaborative job.
That's so cool.
Writing screenplays, and I really enjoy it.
Yeah. Now, have you been to family camp, like an actual family camp before?
So
did they send you for experience?
No, my parents wouldn't go to a family camp if you paid them. But I have gone to many youth camps. That was my whole youth. We went to 1 to 2 every year. So
yeah,
I'm, you know, definitely familiar with the culture.
Yeah. That's awesome. I love it. And they do get in a lot of scrapes in this movie, and
yes,
and a lot of humor, but there's also an element of spiritual truth that comes out. And so I was going to ask you, kind of as a last question here, it's probably a big one though. How do you think, and why, I guess I should say, why do you think merging spiritual truths with humor and the screen is so important, especially in today's world and culture of families and people watching?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we really believe that humor does open up the heart to receive truth. And we have found that to be true. And I think that's true for all of us. When we're laughing, we can hear things we need to hear better, right?
Right.
So, I mean, we definitely feel like that's our calling, our company's calling. And Tommy and Eddie certainly believe that. They tour live all over the country. And, in the case of Family Camp, it was kind of funny because we were also mildly commenting on Christian culture, right? And camp culture and some of those things. And so, but it was in a way that sort of showcased like maybe the things that are unhealthy, in our culture, but also some of the things that are healthy, and how, we have a character that Eddie James plays, that is just this over the top Christian, right? And he is his righteousness is so important. And then you have Tommy's character that does not want to be there, misses church all the time because he's playing golf, and he's literally dragged there by his wife. So, you have these two very opposite characters who end up teaching each other, as they're lost on the mountain, hating each other. And so it's fun, it's a good way to explore without being offensive.
Right.
We're just raising questions through quirky characters,
right,
for you to work out how you will.
Yeah, exactly. And it's true. I mean, camp does have a way of throwing people together who have extremely different and varied backgrounds within the Christian church. And you go in there thinking, I remember as, even as a kid, but even when I was on staff, going in thinking, oh, these campers are all going to believe the same thing and have the same values. And you're like, oh, and let me just dial back here and reset my interpretation of Christianity as a whole.
Exactly. I mean, there's really almost no, it's so eclectic.
Yes.
Camps are.
Yes.
And you just meet, it's everybody from the coolest, most popular, most beautiful kid all the way down to the quirkiest, weirdest person. And somehow they all, end up mixed together. And what kind of happens there is real beauty and a testament to what God can do. And how he works through relationships. And I remember some of that, I remember watching that and really connecting with people that I didn't think I had anything in common with. And then watching people who seem to have it all together, sort of reveal like they don't have it together and they're hurting. And all of that, was under the stars, right, with the youth pastor preaching and the kind of bad worship because they didn't have any acoustic guitar that night or whatever, and it was fabulous. I think everybody should experience it if they can.
Yeah, I think it's great. And then you throw in the marshmallows and chocolate bars and graham crackers.
Absolutely.
And the s'more tops it off. I mean, if nothing's going to bond you like Jesus, a s'more will. That's kind of my motto.
Well, and it helps you recover from how the food gets processed. It's like you would start, like you'd have dinner, and then the next morning that dinner was somehow in the form of breakfast.
Yes.
And then, it's the lunch casserole that's like, oh my gosh,
Right. You have a mixture of peas and hash browns and some sort of weird creamy sauce that is topped with maraschino cherries or something odd. And we're like, oh, that was special.
That's awesome. Yeah. So.
Yeah. I remember sneaking in protein bars.
Right. We all brought our snacks.
Right.
For sure.
Yeah. Oh, that's funny. So the movie is Family Camp. It's with the Skit Guys, and the Skit Guys have a variety of things. I mean, just look them up online for anybody listening. But then Rene Gutteridge also has her backlist of novels that she's written, so we don't want to forget those. Some of the titles of them that readers could look up if they wanted to check them out would be...
Well, if they like comedy, I have the Boo series.
Okay.
There's 4 novels in that: Boo, Boo-hoo, Boo-hiss, and Boo Humbug. And there's also the Occupational Hazard series. So those are all my comedies. I have some rom-coms, Never the Bride. And then I have suspense. I have several standalones. I have the Storm series. So yeah, I kind of write eclectically because of my screenwriting background.
That makes sense.
So, I just I haven't hit historical, and I don't think I will. I'm too lazy of a writer.
Yeah, that's a whole other element of research that has to go into that one. But that's awesome. I love it. And I'm really glad that you didn't join the FBI and you instead graced us with all this fun and comedy and entertainment. It's great.
Well, I found out later I'm too short.
Oh, really? There's a height limit?
Yeah, there's a height
minimum?
Mm-hmm. I'm 5'2", so I don't make it. I believe it's 5'4".
Oh, well, there's such a thing as platform shoes. I mean, hello. There's your next movie, a too short person joining the FBI. That would be fun.
Yeah, exactly.
Awesome. Well, Renee, thank you so much for being part of the podcast today. This has been a blast, and I appreciate your answering all the questions I had about screenplays versus fiction, etc.
Well, it's been so fun, and I do feel like we've been in a coffee shop, and so you are a blast.
It was fun. So my coffee's empty too, so we're gonna need to go get a refill. So thanks, Renee.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining Madlit Musings, where every conversation is a journey and every book is a new adventure. Subscribe now on your favorite podcast player or check us out on YouTube, and let's explore the fascinating intersection of faith, society, and storytelling together.